So I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and for those of you that want to know what roads we're driving on, I'm going east on West Broad Street. Started filming earlier than I was going to. I was going to wait till I got closer to downtown, but there's a lot of graffiti where I'm at right now, and there was a ton of garbage back there, so I thought, I should start filming early. You can see the graffiti right there. There's more. Basically every building that's, open like that has graffiti on the side of it. This is the 4th largest city in the state of Virginia with a population of 230,000, and it's rising slightly. It's not really growing, but the population it's rising. More graffiti up on the top. You probably couldn't see that on the top of that building. Yeah, this might not be the best area either. A lot of the buildings before I started filming were all like boarded up, like that's all boarded, or well, it's not boarded up, but there's nothing in it. It's 43% white, 41% black, 8% Hispanic, and 2% Asian, so it's pretty diverse, Richmond. The average age is 34, and again, the male-female ratio is way off here. It's 47% male and 53% female, which I've been seeing that in a lot of cities lately, where especially cities that have higher crime, that there's way less men than women in these cities. And I'm gonna have to look up what the overall population in the United States is, if there's more women than men, because it's becoming more and more common. At least the further you go towards the East Coast, it seems like there's more women than men. More graffiti up to the right there. I don't know if the camera's picking all that up. I don't know if you can see all this garbage, but there's just garbage everywhere on the side of the road. It's just everywhere there's garbage. And there's a 43% home ownership rate here, which is a little on the low side. Anything more graffiti, anything that's in that below 50%, in my opinion, would be considered low. But 43 is actually, for cities with higher crime, it's actually, pretty good. 19% poverty rate. So 1 out of every 5 people that live here live below the poverty line. And oddly, there's only 2% of the population here is Asian. But 32%, 1/3 of that 2%, basically, of the Asians live below the poverty line. So typically that's not a stat you see in a city. It's not typically the Asians that are the ones that are higher percentage of those below the poverty line. It's rarely do you see that, actually, especially in a city that only has 2% Asian population. So they have a 29% marriage rate, which is really low. I've seen it lower, but that's 29% is really low. And 60% of the people that live here were born in the state of Virginia, and it's showing that they have a 5% non-citizen rate, which I would question that. Obviously, people have to admit to not being a citizen, so that plays into that. The homicides here, they go up and down every year, but they mostly are in the 50s to 60s each year. And what is this doing? I want to get over this lane. A lot of road constructions this time of year. So their homicides range in the 50s to 60s every year, And in 2021, it spiked to 89, which 2021, if you don't know, was way worse than 2020. 2021 was, everything spiked in 2021. So not just here, but it was like kind of across the board in the whole United States. Everything was going up. So they had 89 that year, and that gave them a murder rate of 37.9, which is really high. Otherwise, their murder rate is right in the upper 20s, which is still higher than Chicago. Chicago's in the murder rate in Chicago is typically right around 22. Chicago, the number of homicides go up and down, but for the most part, their murder rate kind of stays right in the same ballpark. It doesn't fluctuate by huge numbers or huge percentages. The assault rates here are in the 200s, which is actually really good for a city like this. Oh, all of this traffic. Okay. Yeah, we're still in, I mean, this is kind of like a cute area, but it looks kind of shady at the same time. So their theft rates are in the 2000s per 100,000 people. And their burglaries also are really high. They're in the 300 to 400s. But that's down from the 900s. They used to be back, if you go back to like 2011, 2012, their burglaries were really high here. So they brought it down, but it's still, you know, higher than most cities are. But they brought it down by about half of what it used to be. Yeah, the whole left side of the road, there's graffiti everywhere. It's the buildings, well, now a couple on the end are open. But for the most part, it's all graffiti on the left side. I don't know if the camera's even picking that up. I gotta get like a 360 view on this camera because it was all graffiti, that whole left side. So your odds of becoming a victim of a crime here is 1 in 27. And they're showing a year-over-year crime increase of 22%, which is a number that is not sustainable. If the city has that for a couple years, it's going to get to a point where they're going to have a hard time pulling it back. 22% increase over the course of even 1 year is a huge increase, let alone if you do that same thing for a couple years. And the cost of living here is around the national average. Housing is 26% higher though. And that explains why they only have a 43% homeownership rate. If the housing is super expensive, nobody can afford to buy a house. So the schools graduate, 67% of the students graduate proficient at reading and math. And in the state of Virginia, 79% graduate proficient at reading and math. Overall, the average across the state. And the average in the United States is only 48%. So as a state, Virginia is doing really good, and the schools in Richmond are doing a very good job teaching their students compared to the rest of the United States anyway, because America doesn't teach their kids anything anymore. The kids graduate just stupid, and they don't know anything, and if they can't ask Siri the answer to the question, they'll never figure it out. 80% of the people that live here completed the 8th grade, and 79% of the people that live here completed high school. And 61% completed some college, and 42% have an associate's degree. So that's pretty good. So it's a smarter population that lives here, but that must be the other 40% of people that moved here that weren't born here. I if you can hear that squeaking in the back, there's a couple of water bottles rubbing together. I apologize about that. Can't really stop and fix it right now. Yeah, more closed. Oh, nope, that one's open. So statistically, it's not horribly bad. It's not necessarily what you'd say call good either, but it's not horribly bad. There's a lot of graffiti here though. This is, I think, one of the main roads that ran through. I just am kind of doing a drive from one side of town to the other, like going from the west to east. And that Broad Street that we're on, now it's East Broad Street. I was on West Broad Street. Broad Street that I'm on must be one of the main roads that run through here. But there isn't much else to look at. I'm going to let this keep rolling a little bit because there's still graffiti on stuff, so I can't be in a good area yet. But there's a significant amount of graffiti here compared to a lot of other cities. I mean, it doesn't compare to Baltimore, which kind of takes the prize on graffiti, but for a city that's not something that, when you think of crime, I don't think Richmond, Virginia pops into your head. And I don't think I would say that it's a super high crime city, but it's definitely not safe. And even a lot of times I go through these cities and you look at them and the crime numbers, the statistics are really high on some of these cities. And you look at these numbers and you're like, holy cow, and you're driving around the city and you're like, I would move here. Looks like a really nice city. How is the crime so bad? It looks so nice. And this one's the opposite of that. This one, at least where we first were and where I was driving before I started filming, it was, I mean, graffiti after graffiti and a bunch of like storefronts with nothing in it or buildings that were boarded up. And the crime here, statistically, it's not good, but it's statistically not all that bad either at the same time. So then you gotta wonder too, there's a lot of stop signs on this road. Seems like I gotta stop every block. You gotta wonder if this is one of those cities that don't report all the crimes that happen, because a lot of cities, you know, if the theft is below a certain dollar amount, you know, the police don't do anything. They don't charge the people. Nothing happens. It doesn't get reported. I mean, it might get reported, but it doesn't get recorded as a theft because the dollar amount's not big enough for it to be recorded that way. And it could be that way with some assaults too in some cities. Things have to rise to a certain level before they actually, you know, where it gets recorded and someone gets prosecuted or whatever for it. And their murder rate is, on a good year, a little worse than Chicago, and on a bad year it's way worse than Chicago. So the murders are harder to hide, so those statistics typically are closer to accurate. They might not be, you know, actually accurate, but they're closer to accurate than a lot of other stuff because it's harder to hide that. Oh. That's got graffiti on it. You can't get through there either. So it's entirely possible that this is one of those cities that just dead end. I don't know. You got this GPS. I don't even know where it's taking me. But you can't get out of anywhere up here. We'll go up this way. See if we can get out of here. Yeah, some of these houses are, we ended up in an iffy neighborhood. Yep, we somehow ended up in like an iffier neighborhood. But it's okay, we'll go up here and we'll get up on one of these roads that'll take us out of here a little bit. This one looks like it will. But that's a common thing. That's a common thing that you find in a lot of these cities, that especially this, I'm filming this in 2024, it's election year. They, you know, they don't want things to look bad in an election year. This is Virginia, you know, they don't want it to look bad. They probably weren't reporting all the stuff that they, you know, came in. And it's possible they don't report everything correctly, you know, all the time. Now it looks like we're back into a little better area. Still a lot of garbage, but the houses look a little nicer. And that's that road right there that was blocked off by those on the other end. We just drove around. Man, it stinks here too. It smells like human waste. Look at all this garbage. Just a bunch of garbage on the side of the road. That's the easiest thing in the world for a city. Those two things. The roads here have been actually halfway decent. The roads are one of the things I look at. The homeless people, which I haven't seen too many. There are some, but I haven't seen too many. And the graffiti, just pay somebody to go around and paint over it all. Who cares if they come back and they put it on it again? Just have one person on staff in the city that's all they do is drive around and paint over graffiti. Have another person that you pay to go around and pick up all this garbage. Or do those, what they used to do when people were when they had to do the community service or whatever, send people out to pick up the garbage. I mean, although I guess if you're not arresting anybody for smaller crimes, you don't have anybody that's getting community service, and that would explain why nobody's coming out to pick up the garbage. But those are the two easiest things that a city can do to make it look nicer. Clean up the garbage and paint over the graffiti. But, all right, well, I think we're actually out of Richmond city limits at this point. So I'm going to cut this off here, and I hope you like the drive through Richmond, and thanks for watching.